1892, Surrey, House Ashdown. The morning should have felt like a beginning. Instead, Lady Amelia Ashdown stood in the withdrawing room with a stillness that didn't belong to a bride. Her gown shimmered with ivory light, yet her fingers trembled against the silk bouquet as if it was something fragile trying to escape her grasp. Outside the door, guests shuffled and whispered, that polite, controlled hum that always made Amelia feel like a painting being examined. Her marriage to Lord Harringdale was an arrangement, not a romance. She'd accepted that without protest. But as the church bells struck the hour, a pressure gathered beneath her ribs, a quiet, growing certainty that something was wrong. A footman appeared, pale around the edges. "My lady, it is time." She nodded, but her legs felt unsteady, as though the floor had shifted and no one else noticed. She whispered a quick prayer, not for love, not even for happiness, just for dignity. The carriage jolted over the stones toward Ashtonleigh Chapel, its tall windows glowing like watchful eyes. When Amelia stepped down, a soft gasp swept through the crowd as they rose. She forced her breath steady and walked. The aisle stretched long and merciless beneath her feet. She reached the altar. No groom, not a shadow of him, not a hurried footstep, not even a whisper of apology. Only an emptiness so sharp her lungs forgot how to work. A murmur rippled through the pews, not loud but enough to cut. Where is he? Surely he wouldn't. Oh, the poor girl! Heat crawled up Amelia's throat. Her vision blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from the shock of standing alone while her life collapsed around her. She turned, searching the sea of faces, hoping, foolishly, for a glimpse of Harringdale's familiar profile. She found someone else instead. Lord Nathaniel Northwood, the Duke of Hawthorne. He sat near the front, still as carved stone, his gaze locked on her with unnerving clarity. She had seen him once before, a winter banquet where he'd danced with no one and spoken to few a man whispered about in every drawing room, ruthless, controlled, cold as the marble halls he frequented. He should not have been looking at her, but he was. And something in that gaze, steady, unreadable, made the humiliation burn deeper. Of all the people to witness her unravel, why him? Her breath hitched. She forced her chin up, but dignity felt like sand slipping through her grip. She heard the whispers rising, sharper now, less cautious. She's been abandoned. Not even a message. How humiliating! The chapel closed in around her. The candles flickered. The air thinned. Her pulse hammered a frantic beat against her stays. She tried to breathe, once, shallowly, but the breath caught halfway, breaking against the awful silence swelling inside her. Her fingers tightened around her bouquet until petals crushed beneath her glove. The world watched, and Amelia Ashdown stood at the altar, alone, fighting the first tear that threatened to fall. Somewhere in the pews, the Duke's posture shifted, barely, a subtle motion she wouldn't have noticed if she weren't desperate for something, anything, that resembled solid ground. But she had none, not a groom, not a voice to defend her, not a soul beside her, just the echo of a promise made for duty and broken without a single explanation. For a heartbeat, Amelia stood frozen at the altar, the silence pressing around her like a second skin. Her breath hitched behind her veil, and the rows of guests blurred into a single, suffocating weight. Then she felt it, a presence beside her. Not the groom, a different man, taller, steadier, a figure she recognized only from whispers and the rare glimpse at distant gatherings. The Duke of Ravensden. He did not touch her. He did not bow. He only angled his head, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "Miss Ashdown," he murmured, calm where she was trembling. "Walk with me." She almost faltered. "Why?" "Because standing alone will ruin you," he said simply, "and I cannot watch that happen." The room watched them with wide, scandal-hungry eyes, but the Duke's composure held the entire chapel in place. He extended his arm, formal, proper, gloved, the gesture of a gentleman, not a lover. Her fingers trembled as she placed them atop his sleeve. A murmur rippled through the pews. He moved forward, slow, deliberate, carrying her with him, as though escorting a bride was something he had been born to do. Emilia kept her chin lifted, every step a battle against the humiliation clawing at her throat. But the Duke's stride did not waver. His presence alone felt like a shield. When they reached the chapel doors, he paused, just long enough to lower his voice again, the faintest warmth hiding beneath the veneer of formality. "You will not remember this as the day you stood abandoned," he said, "only as the day you did not fall." Her eyes burned, not from shame now, but from the unexpected steadiness of him. He guided her down the steps with impeccable decorum, opened the waiting carriage door himself, and offered his hand for her to step inside. She did. And for a single breath, one brief, suspended moment, he met her gaze through the veil. No pity, no triumph, just quiet, unmistakable resolve. Then the door shut. The carriage jolted forward, and Emilia was carried away from the chapel, away from the gasping crowd, away from the ruin the morning had threatened to leave upon her name. The last thing she saw as the horses pulled her down the lane was the Duke of Ravensden standing on the church steps, shoulders squared, ready to face the whispers meant for her. And for the first time since the bells began tolling, she did not feel forsaken. She felt protected. The morning after the ruined wedding, House Ashdown held its breath, not out of sympathy, not out of grief, but out of polite discomfort, the kind English households excelled at. Everyone avoided Emilia. She moved through the corridors like a ghost in lace, the scent of crushed roses still clinging to her gloves from where her bouquet had fallen yesterday. Every mirror she passed felt like a betrayal, catching the faint redness at the corners of her eyes, the tight line of her mouth, the girl who had stood alone in a chapel built for two. Her father tried to pretend nothing had happened. He poured tea, asked about her sleep, spoke of weather and tenants and nothing that mattered at all, but beneath his gentle tone lay something harder. Fear. A Viscount's daughter abandoned at the altar was not a small matter, and Emilia felt his anxiety in every breath. By noon, the whispers began. Servants passing outside her door, a maid who could not quite meet her eyes, a footman lowering his voice too late. Will she still receive callers? Poor girl, ruined before she's even married. She must be wed quickly. Imagine the scandal if not. Each word stabbed cleanly, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Emilia closed her door and pressed her back to it, breathing through the ache. She could survive humiliation. She could even survive heartbreak. But she could not survive becoming a burden to her father. She refused to be the reason his name was dragged through drawing rooms. For hours, she wandered the edge of the gardens alone, white gloves trailing along winter-stiff hedges, her thoughts circling the same quiet terror. What happens to a lady no one chooses? And then, a sound she didn't expect. Hoofbeats. Deep, even, expensive hoofbeats. Her breath stalled. She did not turn, not at first, as if refusing to look would make the world stay simple for another second. Only when she heard her father's surprised greeting did she pivot. Nathaniel Northwood, Duke of Hawthorne, stood in the entry hall. He was not in riding attire this time. He'd come dressed in a black morning coat, waistcoat of muted silver, and a stiff, high collar that framed the sharp line of his jaw. His hair was still wind-touched from the ride, but he looked every inch the man society whispered about. Dangerous, elegant, composed to the point of cruelty. He should not have been here. Not today. Not after what she'd endured under his gaze. Her heart collided with her ribs once, painfully. Her father bowed slightly, masking his surprise with aristocratic skill. "Your Grace, what brings you to Ashdown?" Nathaniel's eyes flickered, just barely, toward the corridor where Emilia stood half hidden. But he didn't approach her. He didn't call her name. He didn't intrude. Instead, he offered her father the most impeccable version of himself, calm, formal, respectful. "I was passing through the district," he said, voice low and even, "and thought it proper to inquire after your daughter." Emilia froze. He had not come for her, not openly. He would never humiliate her again by showing concern that could be mistaken for pity. He came with dignity, giving her the choice to approach or retreat. Her father cleared his throat. "She is managing." Nathaniel gave a polite nod. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but charged. The kind of silence that made Amelia's pulse flutter, though she didn't understand why. He did not ask to see her. He did not impose. He simply existed there, tall and steady and devastatingly composed, as if giving her the dignity of distance. It should have comforted her. Instead, it made her feel seen. Her father shifted, uneasy, and finally said, "Emilia, come greet His Grace." Her stomach tightened. She stepped forward mechanically, hands clasped to hide their trembling. Their eyes met, and the world startled into stillness. Not because he smiled. He didn't. Not because he softened. He couldn't. But because something inside his gaze held the truth she had tried to ignore since the chapel. He had seen her pain, every shattered piece of it, and it had unsettled him. She curtsied. "Your Grace, I thank you for your consideration." A muscle in his jaw moved, barely. "It was nothing, my lady." But it wasn't nothing. She felt it in her chest. He felt it too. Her father, misreading the tension, spoke too quickly. "Emilia, there is someone I wish you to meet this week. A gentleman, respectable, kind. He—" Her breath stopped. He was doing it, pressuring her, trying to save her, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Her vision blurred. Her father continued, gentle but firm. "We cannot endure a second scandal. You must consider—" "Father, please!" Nathaniel's head turned sharply toward her. Concern, real concern, flickered and vanished just as fast. Her father exhaled heavily. "We will speak more of this after supper." Emilia could not breathe. She excused herself quietly, retreated to her room, and shut the door with trembling hands. Her father's words rang in her skull. "You must marry, you must, before the whispers destroy us." She sank onto the bed, dress pooling around her like wilted silk. And for the first time since the chapel, she cried, silently, painfully, with a hand pressed to her mouth so no one would hear. Downstairs, Nathaniel remained. He felt the ache of her absence like a bruise forming under the ribs, unexpected, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. After a few minutes, he bowed to her father. "If Lady Emilia should require anything, you may call upon me." Her father nodded gratefully. Nathaniel turned to leave. But as he walked toward the door, a faint unease stirred low in his chest, the same instinct that had driven him to step forward in the chapel. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. He didn't know yet that he would be back within the hour. He didn't know that Emilia Ashdown was already planning to run. He didn't know the next time he looked into her room, it would be empty, and her horse would be gone. For the rest of the afternoon, House Ashdown felt too small. Emilia tried to read, tried to sew, tried to breathe, but every quiet corner carried the same weight. "You must marry, quickly, before they whisper again." Her father had never raised his voice to her in her life, yet the look he'd given her, gentle, worried, desperate, had left a bruise far deeper than anger ever could. As the sun lowered, the manor filled with soft evening light. Lamps were lit. Servants moved upstairs with hushed footsteps. Everything appeared normal, except her. She kept replaying the moment the Duke stood in their entry hall. Not the way he looked, though God help her, he was impossible to ignore, but the way he seemed to notice the tremor she'd tried to hide. He hadn't pitied her. He'd simply seen her, and that, somehow, shook her more than the abandonment at the altar. She stood by her window, hands twisting in her skirts, staring out at the darkening fields. For the first time since childhood, she wished she could run without consequence. Her father knocked softly. "Emilia." Her breath tightened. "Yes, father." "May I come in?" She forced her voice steady. "Of course." He stepped inside, shoulders drawn, face lined with worry he tried to conceal. A gentleman of his station wasn't meant to look frightened, but he did. He closed the door behind him. "Sit with me." She sat on the edge of her bed, hands clasped. He joined her, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. For a moment he said nothing, and that alone scared her. "Emilia," he began softly, "I love you. You know that." She nodded. "You are my only child, my pride, my responsibility." Her stomach knotted. He continued, choosing each word with agonizing care. "I have received inquiries, gentlemen wishing to call, respectable men, men who could secure your future." Her pulse stumbled. "Father, hear me." His voice cracked. "The world is cruel to women who suffer public humiliation. If you remain unattached for too long, they'll—" "I don't care what they think, but I do," he said, and the force in his voice startled her. "I cannot watch them tear you apart. I cannot bear it." Emilia swallowed hard. "I'm not ready." His hand tightened around hers. "Readiness is a luxury, my dear. Safety is not." A faint ringing filled her ears, panic rising like water in a room with no exit. She tried again, voice paper thin. "Please don't force this." "I would never force you," he whispered, "but I must guide you, and you must trust me." He didn't realize those words, "must trust me," were the final straw. Her father pressed a kiss to her forehead and left her room gently, unaware that every word had landed like a stone on her chest. The moment the door closed, Emilia stood. She couldn't stay. Not tonight. Not with her heart pounding against the walls of her ribs like a trapped bird. Her hands moved without hesitation, grabbing her cloak, her riding gloves, her small satchel with spare stockings and a worn book. She didn't think. Thinking would stop her. She crossed the room quietly, slipped through the corridor, descended the back stair where no servants lingered. Out into the cold. The wind bit at her cheeks, waking every nerve. She moved quickly to the stables. Her mare, her gentle dappled grey, lifted her head at the sound of footsteps. "Please," Emilia whispered, stroking her neck. "Just a little while." Minutes later, she was riding away from Ashdown, cloak snapping behind her, breath burning in the cold air. She didn't look back. She rode toward the only place that had ever felt like hers. Her mother's cottage, 5 miles through the quiet hills. A place her father rarely visited. A place untouched by society's judgment. A place where no one would ask her to smile, or marry, or pretend she wasn't breaking. She didn't know that while she rode into the dusk with tears stinging her eyes, the Duke, on his horse, was already approaching Ashdown's gates, not for her father. And that when he stepped inside the entry hall, he would see a man pale with panic. And the Duke's world, carefully ordered, carefully controlled, would tilt sharply out of place. Nathaniel arrived at House Ashdown as the light began to fail. The winter sun was bleeding out behind the trees, casting long, bruised shadows across the gravel drive. He dismounted with his usual economy of movement. He handed his reins to a groom, expecting the usual efficient silence of the Ashdown staff. Instead, the boy's hands shook as he took the leather. His eyes darted toward the house, wide and frightened. Nathaniel frowned. He stripped off his riding gloves, the leather slapping softly against his palm. He knew the rhythm of a great house. At this hour, it should be settling into the comfortable hum of evening. Instead, the air felt brittle. He walked up the steps. The front door was already open. Inside, the main hall was in disarray. A maid was weeping softly near the stairs, while the housekeeper whispered to her in a harsh, frantic hiss. A footman hurried past with a lantern, though it was not yet fully dark. Nathaniel stopped in the center of the marble floor. He did not speak. He simply let his presence, heavy, dark, and commanding, fill the space until the chaos stilled. "Your Grace." The voice came from above. Nathaniel looked up. Viscount Ashdown stood at the top of the staircase. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His cravat was undone, his face the colour of old parchment. He gripped the mahogany banister as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Nathaniel's posture sharpened. "What has happened?" The Viscount descended the stairs, his steps uneven. "Emilia," he managed, the name breaking in his throat. "She is gone." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathaniel did not gasp. He did not move, but the blood in his veins seemed to turn to ice. "Gone where?" he asked. His voice was very quiet. "We don't know," the father whispered. "I went to fetch her, to speak with her again about the suitors. Her room is empty. Her cloak is missing." He swallowed hard, a sound of pure misery. "And her mare is gone from the stable." Nathaniel processed this with cold, terrifying clarity. Night was falling, the temperature was dropping, and the sky to the north was heavy with the promise of snow. "Show me," Nathaniel said. He followed the Viscount up the stairs. He did not wait for the older man's slow pace. He moved with a predator's urgency. They reached the door to Emilia's room. It stood ajar. Nathaniel pushed it open. The room was still. A fire burned low in the grate, indifferent to the panic in the house. The wardrobe door stood open, a dark gap where a heavy cloak should have been. On the vanity table, a silver hairbrush lay at an odd angle, as if set down in haste. Nathaniel stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and distress. He walked to the window. On the floor, half hidden by the curtain, lay a small lace handkerchief. He picked it up. It was damp. His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. She had been crying, alone. While her father planned her future and the county whispered about her past, she had been in this room, crying until she felt she had no choice but to run into the dark. He turned to the father. "She felt trapped," he said. It was an accusation. The Viscount flinched. "I only wanted to secure her future. I thought she needed guidance." "She needed to breathe," Nathaniel said roughly. He crushed the damp handkerchief in his fist. "Where would she go?" "I don't know," the father wept. "She has never—" "Think," Nathaniel barked. "A place of safety, a place she feels is hers." The Viscount blinked, tears spilling over. "The cottage," he whispered. "Her mother's old studio, near Oakmere Hill." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "That is 5 miles, uphill." "Yes." "And the snow is starting." Nathaniel looked out the window. The first white flakes were drifting against the glass, innocent and deadly. "I cannot ride," the father choked out, clutching his leg. "My injury. Your grace, please. I beg of you." Nathaniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was already moving. He strode out of the room, past the weeping father, past the terrified servants. He did not feel the cold as he burst out the front doors. He vaulted onto his horse, startling the groom who was still holding the bridle. He spun the stallion around. "Go inside," he ordered the boy, "and keep the fires lit." He kicked the horse into a gallop. The ride was a blur of wind and biting cold. The snow began to fall in earnest, transforming the world into a disorienting landscape of white and grey. Nathaniel rode hard, trusting the horse's footing on the freezing mud. 5 miles. Every minute that passed was a minute the cold could sink into her. Every shadow looked like a fallen rider. The fear in his chest was a living thing, clawing, desperate, unfamiliar. He had told himself he didn't have a heart left to break. He was wrong. The road climbed. The wind howled through the trees, and then, through the swirling snow, he saw it. A small stone chimney. A faint, defiant square of orange light glowing in the darkness. She was there. The relief nearly unseated him. He slowed the horse, his breath tearing out of his lungs in white clouds. He approached quietly, the snow dampening the sound of hooves. He dismounted and tied the horse to a tree. He needed to see her. He needed to know she was whole before he faced her. He walked to the window. Inside, the fire was crackling. Emilia sat on the rug, wrapped in her cloak, her knees pulled to her chest. She was rocking slightly, a small soothing motion. She looked so lonely it hurt to witness. Nathaniel stepped back from the glass. He felt a sudden, fierce protective rage at the world, at her father, at himself for not saving her sooner. He walked to the door. The wind whipped his coat around his legs. He composed his face. He pushed down the panic and the anger, leaving only the steady calm she would need. He raised his hand. He knocked. Firm. 2 solid strikes against the wood. Inside, the rocking stopped. The snow began an hour before dusk, falling in heavy, deliberate sheets that turned the Sussex hills into a blinding expanse of white. It was not a night for travel. It was a night for bolting doors and drawing curtains against the draught. But Emilia Ashdown was not thinking of the cold. She was thinking only of the suffocating heat of the manor house, of her father's frantic pacing, and the way the walls seemed to inch closer with every polite suggestion that she must secure a match before the season ended. She had ridden 5 miles to the cottage on the edge of the estate, a small stone structure her mother had favoured for its solitude. It was cold inside, the air smelling of dormant dust and dried lavender. Emilia moved through the dim light, her hands numb as she coaxed a fire into the hearth. When the flames finally caught, casting long, flickering shadows against the timber beams, she sank into the high-backed armchair and pulled her knees to her chest. For the first time in days, her heart slowed. Here, there were no whispers, no pitying glances from maids, no empty space at the altar. There was only the wind rattling the window pane and the crackle of the wood. She closed her eyes, willing the tension to leave her shoulders. She did not hear the rider at first. The wind swallowed the sound. It was only when the heavy, rhythmic crunch of hooves broke through the storm that her eyes snapped open. She stood, her pulse leaping into her throat. No servant would ride this far in such weather. Her father would have sent a carriage, not a lone horseman. A knock sounded on the door. It was firm, 2 solid strikes against the wood that demanded an answer without asking for one. Emilia hesitated, her hand hovering over the latch. She was alone. The estate was miles away, but the knock came again. She drew the bolt and opened the door. The wind tore it from her grip, blowing a gust of snow into the room. Standing on the threshold, framed by the swirling white dark, was the Duke of Hawthorne. He looked nothing like the composed, terrifying figure who haunted the ballrooms of London. His coat was soaked black at the shoulders, his hair was plastered to his forehead. His chest heaved, his breath clouding the air in ragged bursts. He stared at her, his eyes dark and unreadable, searching her face as if checking for injuries. "You are here," he said. It was an exhale of pure relief. "Your Grace?" Emilia stepped back, stunned. "What are you?" He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside and pushed the door shut against the storm, sealing the cottage in sudden silence. He leaned back against the wood for a moment, closing his eyes, water dripping from the hem of his greatcoat onto the floorboards. "Your father," he said, his voice rough, "believed you had run." Emilia felt the colour drain from her face. I needed air. I didn't think he would realize I was gone so soon." Nathaniel opened his eyes. The look he gave her was sharp enough to cut. "He realized. And when he told me you were missing, I did not wait for a carriage." He peeled off his gloves with jerky, frustrated movements. His hands were red from the cold. "You rode?" she whispered. "In this?" "I would have ridden through fire," he muttered. He moved toward the hearth, holding his hands out to the flames. Emilia watched him, bewildered. This man, the ruthless Duke, the man who supposedly cared for nothing and no one, had ridden 5 miles through a blizzard because she wasn't in her room. She moved to the small kitchenette, her hands shaking as she poured water from the pitcher into a kettle. She set it on the hook over the fire. "You should take off your coat," she said softly. "You'll catch your death." He stripped off the heavy wool garment and draped it over the back of a wooden chair. Underneath, he wore a dark waistcoat and a white shirt that was damp at the collar. He looked tired. Not the polite fatigue of society, but a deep, marrow-settling exhaustion. "Why did you come?" she asked. He turned to face her. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his cheekbones. "Because," he said, "I know what it looks like when someone runs away because they have nowhere left to stand." The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She looked away, staring at the floorboards. "I wasn't running away. I couldn't breathe in that house. Every time my father looks at me, he sees a failure." "He sees his daughter," Nathaniel corrected gently. "But fear makes men blind." "And what do you see?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Nathaniel walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could feel the radiating cold still clinging to him. "I see someone who is holding up the sky with her bare hands," he said softly. "And I see a woman who thinks she is invisible, no matter how many times I try to look at her." Emilia looked up, startled. You tried?" "For months," he admitted. A wry, bitter smile touched his lips. "I stood 10 feet from you and willed you to turn your head. You never did." "I thought you were indifferent," she whispered. "I thought you were like the others." "I have never been indifferent to you," he said. His voice dropped, becoming lower. "I have only ever envied you." "Envied me?" "I was abandoned at the altar." "And you stood there," he said fiercely. "You stood there and took the blow and did not crumble. Do you know how rare that is?" He ran a hand through his damp hair, turning away to pace the small length of the rug. "I crumbled," he said. The confession was sudden, stark. Emilia watched him. "The rumors," she said, "about the woman." He stopped pacing. He stood with his back to her, staring into the dark corner of the room. "Is it true," she asked, "that you are a rake, that you take women and leave them because you have no heart?" Nathaniel let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that the story they tell?" "It is." He turned around. His face was stripped of all defense. "Then let me tell you the truth," he said. 5 years ago I was not a rake. I was a man who believed in honor. I believed that if you loved a woman, you respected her enough to wait." He took a step toward her, his eyes burning. "Her name was Clara. I loved her more than my own dignity. But she had appetites I would not satisfy. She wanted passion. She wanted the things lovers do in the dark, without the vows to bind them." Emilia's breath caught in her throat. "And you refused?" "I refused," he said hard, "because I honored her." He looked down at his hands now, as if they were stained. "She didn't want honor, Emilia. She wanted sensation. She left me a week before our engagement was to be announced. She ran off with a captain who had no title, no money, and no morals. He gave her exactly what I wouldn't." Emilia felt a sharp ache in her chest. "And so she broke you." "She humiliated me," he corrected. "She told society I was cold. She told them I was incapable of passion. And when I saw how easily she was celebrated while I was pitied for my virtue, something in me snapped." He looked at her now, his gaze intense. "I decided that if virtue was the thing that cost me her, I would no longer carry it. I became the man she said I was. I drank. I gambled. I took women to my bed not because I loved them, but because I wanted to drown the part of me that had been foolish enough to be good." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I let them whisper. I let them fear me, because it was better to be a monster than a fool." Emilia looked up at him. She saw the pain beneath the anger, the boy who had been betrayed beneath the armor. "You are not a monster," she said softly. "I have done monstrous things," he countered. "I have used people to numb myself." "But you are here," she said. "You rode through a storm for me." He looked at her, his expression crumbling. The anger drained out of him, leaving only a desperate sort of longing. "Yes," he whispered. "Because when I saw you standing in that chapel, when I saw you bearing the weight of humiliation that broke me, I felt something I haven't felt in 5 years." "What?" she breathed. He reached out. His hand hovered near her face, trembling slightly, before his fingers grazed her cheek. "I felt ashamed," he said. "Ashamed of the man I had become. And for the first time, I wanted to be better. I wanted to be the man who could stand beside you." Emilia leaned into his touch. It was instinct. "I have secrets too," she whispered. "Tell me," he murmured, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "I'm afraid that I am unlovable, that I will spend my life waiting to be discarded." Nathaniel made a low sound in his throat. He moved his hand to cup the back of her neck. "You are not nothing," he said fiercely. "You are the only thing in this world that feels real to me." He looked down at her, his eyes searching hers. "If I were to marry you, Emilia, I would not discard you. I would spend every day of my life trying to prove that I am worthy of the woman who saved me from the dark." The fire crackled, loud in the silence. Emilia raised her hand and placed it over his heart. She could feel it beating, heavy, steady, strong. "Stay," she whispered. It was not an invitation to his bed. It was an invitation to his life. Nathaniel let out a long, shuddering breath. He leaned his forehead against hers. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. He moved away only to drag the armchair closer to the fire. He sat and he pulled her down to sit on the rug beside him, wrapping the heavy wool blanket around her shoulders. They sat in silence as the night wore on. He told her about the empty halls of Hawthorne House. She told him about the books she read to escape. They traded pieces of themselves like currency, buying back the dignity the world had stolen from them. And as Emilia finally drifted into sleep, her head resting against the Duke's knee, she realized that the cottage was no longer a place to hide. It was the place where she had finally been found. The dawn broke over Sussex in a wash of pale winter violet. The storm had exhausted itself in the night, leaving the world buried under a heavy silence of white. Inside the cottage, the fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals. Emilia woke slowly, the stiffness in her neck protesting the angle at which she had slept. She was curled on the rug, the rough wool of the Duke's greatcoat tucked securely around her shoulders. For a moment in the haze of waking, she forgot where she was. She expected the silk canopy of her bed at Ashdown, the heavy velvet curtains blocking out the day. Then she smelled wood smoke and drying wool, and the faint, clean scent of bergamot. She sat up, clutching the coat. Nathaniel was already awake. He stood by the small, frosted window, looking out at the buried lane. He had discarded his waistcoat in the night, standing now in his white shirt and trousers, his braces hanging loose at his sides. He held a chipped ceramic mug, one of her mother's, and the steam curled around his fingers. He looked domestic, human. The sight of him, stripped of his title and his armor, made Emilia's chest ache with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. He turned at the sound of her movement. His face was shadowed, the morning stubble dark along his jaw, but his eyes were clear. "The snow has stopped," he said. His voice was low, rough with sleep. Emilia pushed the hair back from her face, feeling self-conscious. "What time is it?" "Early. The sun is barely up." He walked toward her, extending the mug. "There was tea in the pantry. It's strong, but hot." She took it, her fingers brushing his. The heat of the ceramic seeped into her cold hands. "Thank you." He did not step away immediately. He stood over her, looking down with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between relief and reluctance. Reluctance, she realized, to leave this room. "We must go back," she said softly. The words tasted like ash. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He looked at the door, then back to her. "Your father will be frantic." "He will be angry," she corrected. No, Nathaniel said firmly. He will be a father who thought he had lost his child. There is no room for anger in that kind of fear. He reached down, offering a hand to help her stand. She took it. He pulled her up, and for a second they stood toe to toe on the worn rug, the memory of last night's confessions hanging heavy in the air between them. He had told her he was broken. She had told him she was afraid. Those truths could not be stuffed back into the box of polite society. "Emilia," he said, his voice dropping, "whatever awaits us at Ashdown, you do not face it alone. Do you understand?" She looked up at him, seeing the steel beneath the exhaustion. "I understand." He nodded once, released her hand, and reached for his waistcoat. The moment was over. The Duke of Hawthorne was returning. The ride back to the manor was slow. The horses picked their way carefully through the drifts, their breath pluming in the frigid air. Nathaniel rode close to her, so close that his stirrup occasionally brushed hers. He positioned his larger stallion on the windward side, shielding her from the biting breeze coming off the hills. It was a silent gesture, a husband's gesture. When the iron gates of House Ashdown finally came into view, rising like black skeletons against the snow, Emilia felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten beneath her ribs. She saw the movement before she heard it. Grooms running across the courtyard, a stable boy pointing, the heavy oak front doors swinging open. They had been watching. "Head up," Nathaniel murmured, not looking at her, his eyes fixed on the house. "You have nothing to apologize for." She straightened her spine, gripping the reins. By the time they reached the gravel drive, a small crowd had gathered. Servants stood on the periphery, their breath clouding the air, eyes wide. But Emilia saw only one figure. Her father stood at the top of the stone steps. Viscount Ashdown looked as though he had aged a decade in a single night. He was still wearing the clothes he had worn yesterday, his cravat undone, his face grey and unshaven. He gripped the stone balustrade with white-knuckled force. Emilia's breath caught in her throat. She knew that grip. It was the way he held a ledger when the debts were high. It was the way he held a glass before he shattered it. Here it comes, she thought, the scolding, the lecture on dignity, the reminder that she was a viscount's daughter who had behaved like a stable girl running into the night. She stiffened her shoulders, bracing herself for the words reckless and ruined to strike her like stones. Nathaniel dismounted first. He moved with a fluid, commanding calm that instantly silenced the murmuring grooms. He tossed his reins to a stable boy and walked to Emilia's horse. He reached up, his hands spanning her waist, and lifted her down to the snowy gravel as easily as if she were made of paper. He stepped back, allowing her to face her father. "Father, But the lecture never came. The Viscount stumbled down the icy steps, disregarding his own safety. He didn't look angry. He looked shattered. Before she could finish her apology, he reached her. He didn't strike her. He didn't scold her. He pulled her into his arms with a desperate, trembling force that knocked the wind from her lungs. Emilia froze, her hands hovering in the air, stunned by the sudden warmth. "I thought—" Her father buried his face in her hair, his voice cracking into a sob she had never heard before. "I went to your room. The horse was gone. I thought I had driven you away for good." Emilia's defense crumbled. The fear she had braced against dissolved, leaving her knees weak. She slowly wrapped her arms around him. "I am here, father," she whispered, realizing for the first time that his anger had never been about reputation. It had been about loss. The Viscount held her for a long moment, then pulled back, gripping her shoulders. He searched her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the damp hem of her cloak, the way she leaned slightly toward the Duke as if seeking an anchor. He wiped a hand across his eyes, composing himself. He looked past her, to the man standing silent and imposing by the horses. Nathaniel had not moved. He stood watching them, his face impassive, his hands clasped behind his back. The Viscount walked toward him. The gravel crunched under his boots, a harsh sound in the quiet morning. "Your Grace," the Viscount said, his voice hoarse. "Lord Ashdown, Nathaniel replied. You found her. I knew where to look, Nathaniel said simply. We waited out the storm. The roads were impassable. The Viscount stilled, waited out the storm. The implication hung heavy in the cold air. A man, a woman, a cottage with no servants, a night that had lasted 12 hours. The Viscount's brow rose, sharp, protective, and suddenly suspicious. He looked at the Duke, then back at Amelia's dishevelled state, then back to the Duke. That is a long time to be alone, Your Grace, the father said, his voice dropping to a warning low. I trust no lines were crossed that cannot be uncrossed. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. His eyes flashed with a dangerous pride. He opened his mouth to speak, to defend his honor, but he didn't get the chance. No, father! The voice was Amelia's. She stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. She looked her father in the eye, steady, unblinking, without a trace of the shame he feared. He offered me his coat, she said clearly, and he offered me safety. He would not dishonor me. The Viscount looked at his daughter. He searched her face for a lie, for a blush, for a flinch. He found none. He let out a long breath, the suspicion draining out of him, leaving only exhaustion. He looked back at Nathaniel with a new respect. Then I am in your debt, the Viscount said quietly. Come inside. You cannot ride back to Hawthorne without a meal. The morning room was warm, a sharp contrast to the biting cold outside. A fire roared in the grate. The table was set with silver and china, though no one had yet touched the food. The dynamic of the house had shifted. Yesterday, the air had been thick with tension and unspoken demands. Today, there was a quiet, fragile peace. Nathaniel sat on Amelia's right. He poured tea for her, his movements precise and gentle. Her father watched the small interaction. He watched the way Amelia's hand relaxed when the Duke placed the cup near her. He watched the way Nathaniel's eyes tracked her movements, attentive and unguarded. The Viscount cleared his throat. I have been hasty, he began, looking down at his plate. In pressing for a match. Amelia stilled. I was afraid, her father admitted to the room. I saw how Harringdale hurt you. I saw the way the county whispered. I thought a new engagement would silence them. He looked up, his eyes meeting Amelia's. I did not realize I was becoming the very thing I was trying to protect you from. Father, Amelia said softly. There will be no more suitors, the Viscount declared. He looked at Nathaniel. I will not force her to entertain men she does not wish to know. If the county wishes to whisper, let them whisper. I would rather have a spinster daughter who is safe than a married one who runs into the snow to escape me. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. She reached out and covered her father's hand. Nathaniel set his teacup down. The china clicked softly against the saucer. She will not be a spinster, the Duke said. The room went utterly still. The Viscount looked at him. Amelia turned slowly, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Nathaniel was not looking at her father. He was looking at her. His gaze was steady, stripped of all the pretense and walls he had built over 5 years of solitude. She will not be a spinster, he repeated, his voice low and resonant, because I intend to marry her. The Viscount inhaled sharply. Your Grace? I am not a man who makes offers lightly, Lord Ashdown, Nathaniel said. You know my reputation. You know what they say of me. I am called ruthless. I am called cold. I know, the Viscount whispered. Then know this, Nathaniel said. I have spent 5 years ensuring no one could ever hurt me again. I built walls so high I forgot what the sun looked like. He glanced back at Amelia. Until I saw your daughter standing alone in that chapel. He reached out in full view of her father and took Amelia's hand. His grip was warm, firm, the grip of a man claiming what he wanted. I do not offer a match of convenience, Nathaniel said firmly. I offer my name, my protection, and everything else I have left to give. Amelia squeezed his hand, her vision blurring. Her father looked between them. He saw the way his daughter was looking at the Duke, not with fear, as she had looked at the suitors, but with a profound, quiet trust. The Viscount let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging in relief. "Then," her father said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have my blessing." Nathaniel nodded once, solemn and terrified, and relieved all at once. He lifted Emilia's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was less a courtship gesture and more a vow. "I will not fail her," he promised the father. But his eyes were on Emilia, and in them she saw the truth he had spoken by the fire. He wasn't just saving her reputation, he was saving himself. The engagement was announced quietly, yet it detonated across the county with the force of a cannon blast. The Duke of Hawthorne to marry the abandoned bride. It was the sort of headline that kept drawing rooms buzzing from Surrey to London. The ruthless Duke, the man who had spent 5 years sneering at the very concept of matrimony, had been tamed by the quiet, humiliated daughter of a Viscount. To the outside world, it was a scandal of mismatched souls. To Emilia and Nathaniel, it was a fortress they were building, brick by brick, to keep the world out. 3 days after their return from the cottage, Nathaniel arrived at House Ashdown. He did not come alone. He brought his mother's ring. He found Emilia in the small blue drawing room. The door was left intentionally ajar. Nathaniel looked different today. The exhaustion of the blizzard was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused energy. He walked straight to her, took her hand, and turned her palm over, stripping away her glove with deliberate slowness. "This," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his coat pocket, "has not seen the light of day in 5 years." He opened it. Inside sat a sapphire, dark as a midnight ocean, surrounded by diamonds. "I bought this for her," he admitted. The confession hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. "I carried it in my pocket the night I went to her house. I never took it out." She began speaking of leaving before I could even speak of staying. He looked up at Emilia. "I put it in the vault that night. I swore no woman would ever wear it unless I was certain she saw me, and not the title attached to it." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was cool against her skin, a heavy, tangible weight. "You saw me when I was nothing but a stranger in the snow," he whispered. "It belongs to you." Emilia looked down at the stone. "I will not take it off," she promised. "Good," he murmured, leaning in until his breath brushed her cheek. "Because I am not letting you go." For 2 weeks, life was perfect, but happiness in 1892 was a precarious thing, and silence is often just the precursor to a storm. It happened on a Tuesday. Emilia was in the village with her maid, Sarah, visiting the milliner. Emilia was in the back of the shop, examining a spool of ivory lace, when the bell above the door chimed. 2 women entered. Emilia recognized the voices, Mrs. Gable, the innkeeper's wife, and Lady Chatsworth. They did not see her behind the tall shelves. "Are you certain?" Lady Chatsworth whispered. "My husband checked her into the private suite himself," Mrs. Gable hissed, sounding delighted. "Arrived this morning, emerald velvet, hair like copper, a widow now, and rich as Croesus." Emilia's hand froze on the lace. Emerald velvet, hair like copper. "And asking for him before her trunks were even off the rack," Mrs. Gable continued. "The Duke? Who else? She sent a note to Hawthorne House at 10 o'clock, and the best part? His horse was seen on the road to the inn, not 20 minutes later." The spool of lace slipped from Emilia's fingers. It hit the floor with a soft thud. The women went silent. Emilia stood there, her blood turning to ice. "She is back." And he ran to her. He hadn't told her. He hadn't sent a note. He had simply ridden to the woman who had owned his heart for 5 years. Emilia walked out from behind the shelf. The women gasped, their faces draining of color. Emilia did not look at them. She walked out of the shop, her head high, while the ground beneath her feet crumbled. House Ashdown. The waiting. Emilia returned to the manor. She went to the library window and watched the road. 1 hour passed, then 2. Then night fell. He did not come. He is sending her away, she told herself. He is ending it. But the morning came, and Nathaniel did not appear. A note arrived at noon, not for her, but for her father. A brief, hasty scrawl saying he was detained by urgent matters of the estate. It was a lie. The whole village knew where he was. 1 day became 2. 2 days became 3. The silence from Hawthorne House was deafening. Every hour that passed chipped away at Amelia's composure. The whispers in the scullery grew louder. He's still at the inn. They say he hasn't left her side. Amelia stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She sat in the library, twisting the sapphire ring on her finger until the skin was raw. The King's Head Inn, the private parlour. While Amelia withered in silence, Nathaniel was in hell. The parlour was stiflingly hot, smelling of rosewater. Nathaniel stood by the door, his hand on the latch, looking at Clara Vane. "I am leaving," he said. He had said it a dozen times in the last 3 days. Clara lay on the chaise, looking pale and fragile. She held a handkerchief to her lips. "Go then," she whispered, her voice weak. "Leave me here. I have no one else. My husband's solicitors will find me eventually." Nathaniel gritted his teeth. "You said you needed help with the papers. I have looked at them. You are secure." "It's not the papers, Nathaniel," she sobbed, tears spilling perfectly down her cheeks. "It's the fear. He threatened me before he died. I have secrets. Secrets that could ruin your little bride too if they got out." Nathaniel froze. "Leave Amelia out of this." "I can't," Clara said, her eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp intelligence. "Because the debts my husband left, they involve the Ashdown estate. If I go down, Nathaniel, I take her father with me." It was a lie, or a half-truth, but it was complex enough to make him hesitate. "Give me 1 more day," Clara begged, reaching for his hand. "Help me sort the ledger, then I will go. I swear it." Nathaniel looked at her. He hated her, but he feared scandal touching Amelia more. He thought he was protecting her by handling this quietly, by keeping the poison contained in this room. He didn't realize that his silence was doing more damage than any scandal ever could. "1 day," Nathaniel warned, "and then you are gone." He sat back down at the desk, trapped by his own honor, while Clara smiled into her handkerchief. House Ashdown, the 4th day. The 4th morning broke grey and cold. Amelia sat at her vanity. She looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was pale, hollow-eyed, and humiliated. She had heard the latest whisper from Sarah. They say they were seen dining together in the parlour, laughing. It didn't matter if it was true. What mattered was that he wasn't here. He was there, with the woman he had ruined himself for. Amelia looked at the sapphire ring. "I bought this for her," he had said. She finally understood. He hadn't given it to Amelia because he loved her. He had given it to her because he thought he was safe. But the moment the fire returned, the safety meant nothing. She slowly pulled the ring off her finger. It made a hollow click as she set it on the marble table. She stood up. She walked to her wardrobe and pulled out her trunk. She didn't cry. She was done crying. She began to fold her clothes, stockings, chemise, the locket her mother gave her. She was leaving, not for attention, not to make him chase her. She was leaving because she refused to be the woman waiting by the window while her betrothed comforted his past love. She closed the trunk. Outside, the wind began to howl. The sky turned a bruised, violent purple. A storm was coming. And this time, Amelia would not be there when it broke. The storm that had been threatening the north for days finally broke over Ashdown. It slammed against the manor walls with the force of a physical blow, rain lashing the glass like handfuls of gravel. Inside Amelia's bedroom, the only sound was the snap of leather straps. She pulled the buckles of her trunk tight. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the adrenaline of heartbreak. She was dressed in her traveling habit, dark wool, severe and practical. She had left her silks in the wardrobe. She had left the sapphire ring on the table. She was not running away. She was retreating. There was a difference. Running away was an act of fear. Retreating was an act of survival. She couldn't stay. Not here. Not in a house that was preparing for a wedding that would never happen. Every hour she remained was another hour. The servants looked at her with pity. Another hour she imagined Nathaniel in the private parlour of the inn, laughing with the woman who had defined his life. She grabbed the handle of the trunk. It was heavy. She dragged it toward the door. She reached for the brass knob. Before her fingers could touch it, the door flew open. It didn't swing. It slammed against the wall, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. Emilia jumped back, gasping. Nathaniel stood in the doorway. He looked destroyed. He was soaking wet. His hair was plastered to his forehead, water dripping from the ends onto his collar. His coat was dark with rain, mud splattered up to his knees. His chest heaved as if he had run every step of the way from the stables. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were wild, red-rimmed, terrified. He looked at her. Then he looked at the trunk at her feet. The color drained from his face, leaving him grey. "What are you doing?" His voice was a harsh croak, wrecked from days of arguing or silence or shouting into the wind. Emilia straightened her spine. She gripped her hands together to stop them from trembling. "I am leaving," she said. "Leaving?" He repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. He stepped into the room, kicking the door shut behind him with his heel. "Leaving where?" "To the cottage," she said, "and then to London. My aunt will take me in." "London?" He laughed, a sharp, frantic sound. "You are not going to London, Emilia. You are marrying me in 2 days." "I am not marrying you," she cried, the composure she had fought so hard to maintain shattering. "I will not marry a man who spent the week of our wedding in the arms of his former mistress." "I was not in her arms." "You were with her," Emilia shouted back. "For 4 days, Nathaniel. 4 days of silence. You let the whole village watch while you sat with her." She grabbed the handle of the trunk again, trying to drag it around him. "Move!" "No!" "Nathaniel, move!" She tried to shove past him. He caught her. He didn't just stop her. He grabbed her by the waist and hauled her back, away from the door, away from the escape. He pulled her flush against his soaked coat. The cold water seeped instantly through her wool dress, shocking her skin. "Let me go!" she sobbed, fighting him, pushing at his chest. "You smell like her. You smell like roses and lies." "I smell of rain," he roared, holding her tighter, refusing to let her break the contact. "I smell of the storm I rode through to get back to you." "Why did you stay?" she screamed, her fists bunching in his lapels. "If you wanted me, why did you stay?" "Because she threatened you." The words hung in the room, vibrating in the sudden silence. Emilia went still, her hands loosened on his coat. "What?" she whispered. Nathaniel was breathing hard, looking down at her with an agony that stripped him bare. "She didn't just want me back, Emilia. She wanted money. She had debts, gambling debts her husband left behind. She threatened to sell stories to the London papers, stories about your father, stories that would have ruined the Ashdown name before the ink was dry on our marriage certificate." Emilia stared at him. "She... blackmail?" "I stayed to fix it," he said, his voice breaking. "I stayed to pay them off. I stayed to burn the letters she held. I sat in that room for 4 days, suffocating in her perfume, looking at the woman I used to worship and feeling nothing but hate." He released her waist, only to cup her face, his wet thumbs brushing away the tears that were spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't send word because I didn't want you to know. I wanted to handle it. I wanted to protect you from the ugliness." "You didn't protect me," she wept. "You hurt me. You left me alone in the dark." "I know," he groaned, resting his forehead against hers. "I know. I was a fool. I thought I was being noble. I didn't realize I was breaking your heart." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "Emilia, look at me." She did. She saw the truth there. raw, jagged, and undeniable. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why did you come back now?" "Because I finished it," he said fiercely. "She is gone. The debts are paid. The letters are burned. She is on a carriage to Dover, and she will never set foot in this county again." He looked down at the trunk, then at her. "I rode back here to tell you that I am free," he said. "I came to tell you that for the first time in 5 years, the only name in my head is yours." Emilia let out a sob, a sound of relief and pain mixed together. "I thought you chose her," she whispered. "I was packing. I was going to leave you." Nathaniel's grip tightened on her face. "You were leaving me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "2 days before our wedding." "I thought there was no wedding," she cried. "I thought—" "There is a wedding," he swore. "There will always be a wedding. If the church burns down, I will marry you in the ashes." He pulled her into him again, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe, burying his face in the curve of her neck. He was shivering. She realized then that he was terrified. The ruthless duke, the man who feared nothing, was shaking because he had almost lost her. "My darling girl," he whispered into her hair. The endearment broke her. It was soft, old-fashioned, something he had never said before. "My darling girl, did you really think I would let the past take you from me?" Emilia wrapped her arms around his neck, clinging to him, the wet wool of his coat soaking her, the heat of his body seeking hers. "I was afraid," she admitted against his shoulder. "So was I," he confessed. "I was afraid that when I finally came back, the door would be locked." He pulled back just an inch. His blue eyes searched hers, intense and pleading. "Is it locked, Emilia?" She looked at him. She looked at the man who had ridden through a storm, who had paid a fortune to silence a ghost, who had endured 4 days of hell just to keep her name clean. She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "It is open." Nathaniel let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. He leaned down and picked up her trunk with one hand. He walked to the wardrobe and shoved it inside, shutting the door with a definitive thud. Then he walked back to the table. He picked up the sapphire ring. He took her hand, her left hand, still trembling. He slid the ring back onto her finger. "Never take this off again," he ordered, his voice low and rough. "I won't," she promised. He looked at her, water dripping from his hair, mud on his boots, looking wild and desperate and completely, irrevocably in love. "Good," he said, "because we have a wedding to prepare for, and I intend to be at the altar an hour early just to make sure you know I am coming." Emilia laughed, a wet, teary sound. Nathaniel smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen in 4 days. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and held her while the storm raged outside, powerless to touch them now. "1892, Surrey, the morning of the wedding. The sun rose over House Ashdown with a brilliance that felt almost aggressive. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving a vaulted expanse of pale, sharp blue. Emilia stood in front of the tall mirror in her dressing room. She was not breathing. Sarah, her maid, was on her knees, smoothing the heavy silk of the skirt. The dress was not the one she had worn for Lord Harringdale. That dress, ivory lace and bad memories, had been burned in the garden incinerator 2 days ago. This dress was different. It was cream satin, heavy and lustrous, with a high neck and long sleeves that ended in points over her hands. It was a dress for a woman, not a girl. "It fits perfectly, my lady," Sarah whispered, her voice hushed with awe. Emilia stared at her reflection. She saw the dress. She saw the sapphires woven into her hair, Nathaniel's gift. She saw the bouquet of winter roses on the vanity. But beneath the silk, her skin was cold. Panic was a quiet, humming vibration in her bones. It wasn't that she doubted Nathaniel. He had ridden through a storm for her. He had silenced his past for her. He had held her while she wept. But trauma has no logic. The last time she had put on a wedding dress, the world had ended. The last time she had stood in this room, waiting for the carriage, she had been walking toward a cliff edge. Her father knocked on the door. "Emilia?" She turned. Viscount Ashdown stood in the doorway. He was dressed in his formal morning coat, a white rose in his lapel. He looked older than he had a year ago, but he also looked steadier. He walked into the room and stopped. He looked at her. His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back. "You look—" He cleared his throat. "You look like your mother." "I feel like a fraud," Emilia whispered. The confession slipped out before she could stop it. Her father frowned, stepping closer. "Why?" "Because I am terrified," she admitted, her hands shaking. What if the carriage breaks a wheel? What if the bridge floods again? What if I get to the altar and he is not there?" "He will be there," the Viscount said. His voice was iron. "How do you know?" "Because," her father said, taking her gloved hands in his, "I have seen the way he looks at you when you are not watching. Harringdale looked at you like an acquisition. The Duke looks at you like you are the only heir in the room." He squeezed her fingers. "And," the Viscount added dryly, "because his carriage was seen passing the lodge gates an hour ago. He is already at the church." Emilia exhaled, a long, shuddering sound. "He is." "He went early," her father said gently. "He said he wanted to make sure the heating was working, but I suspect he simply wanted to make sure you knew he was waiting." Emilia looked down at her hands. The sapphire ring was hidden beneath her glove, pressing against her skin, a hard, tangible promise. "Ready?" her father asked. Emilia nodded. "Ready." Ashtonley Chapel, 11 a.m. The village had turned out in force. The pews were packed. The peerage had come from London, drawn by the scandal and the spectacle. The villagers stood in the back, craning their necks. Everyone wanted to see the rake marry the girl he had saved. They wanted a show. When Emilia stepped out of the carriage, the air went silent. She took her father's arm. The stone steps of the chapel loomed ahead, the same steps she had walked down alone and humiliated months ago. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, thump, thump. "Breathe," her father whispered. The heavy oak doors swung open. The scent of lilies hit her. It was the same scent as before, the same light filtering through the stained glass, the same sea of faces turning to look at her. For a second, the memory superimposed itself over reality. She felt the phantom weight of the empty altar. She felt the burn of the whispers. Her foot faltered, and then she looked up. He was there. Nathaniel stood at the altar. He was not fidgeting. He was not talking to the priest. He was standing perfectly still, his hands clasped in front of him, facing the doors. He was wearing black, severe, sharp, elegant. He looked like a prince of a dark kingdom. And he was looking directly at her. Across the length of the nave, his eyes locked onto hers. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The expression on his face was one of such intense, focused possession that Emilia felt the breath rush back into her lungs. He nodded. Just once. A tiny, imperceptible motion that said, "I am here. I have you." The fear evaporated. Emilia tightened her grip on her father's arm. "Let's go." They walked. This time, there were no whispers of pity. There was only the rustle of silk as people turned to watch her pass. She didn't look at them. She looked only at him. When they reached the altar, her father stopped. He took Emilia's hand and placed it in Nathaniel's. "She is yours, Your Grace," the Viscount said, his voice thick. "Guard her well." "With my life," Nathaniel answered. He didn't look at the Viscount. He looked at Emilia. His hand closed over hers, warm, dry, steady. "You came," she whispered. A corner of his mouth quirked up. "I told you," he murmured. low enough that only she could hear. "I would be here an hour early. I checked the clock." Emilia let out a small, wet laugh. The priest began the service. The words were ancient, familiar, dearly beloved, but Emilia barely heard them. She was hyper-aware of the man beside her. She could feel the tension in his frame, a tightly coiled energy, as if he were holding himself back from grabbing her and running out the side door. When it came time for the vows, Nathaniel turned to her completely. He did not recite the words by rote. He spoke them like a confession. "I, Nathaniel, take thee, Emilia." His voice was deep, carrying to the back of the church. It was the voice of a man who had spent 5 years in silence, finally speaking the only truth that mattered. "To have and to hold from this day forward." He slid the gold band onto her finger, nestling it next to the sapphire. "For better, for worse," he said, his eyes dark with the memory of the storm, of the inn, of the trunk in her bedroom. "For richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health." He paused. He leaned in slightly, breaking protocol, breaking the distance. "To love," he said, his voice cracking, just a fracture, "and to cherish." Emilia's vision blurred. She squeezed his hand. "Till death us do part." When it was her turn, her voice was clear. It rang like a bell in the silence. "I, Emilia, take thee, Nathaniel." She saw his chest rise and fall. He was breathing as if he had just surfaced from deep water. The priest raised his hand for the final blessing. "Those whom God hath joined together, let no man put asunder." The priest looked at them. "I pronounce that they be man and wife together, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen." It was done. By the strict rules of the church, they were now supposed to turn, take arms, and process out of the sanctuary with dignified distance. Nathaniel didn't move. He looked at Emilia. He looked at her mouth. He knew it was improper. He knew the congregation would gossip. A duke did not kiss his bride at the altar. That was for farmers. He didn't care. He stepped forward, closing the final inch of space between them. He cupped her face in his hands, a gesture so intimate, so possessive, that a collective gasp rippled through the pews. He didn't ask for permission. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck. It was deep, slow, and reverent. It was a claim. It was a public declaration that the rules of high society no longer applied to them. The priest blinked, startled. The Viscount's jaw dropped, but Nathaniel didn't let go. He held her there, in the center of the sanctuary, breathing her in, anchoring her to him, ensuring that the memory of her standing alone at this altar was burned away forever. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "Mine," he whispered. Emilia smiled, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "Yours," she whispered back. He straightened, took her hand, and placed it securely on his arm. He looked at the stunned congregation with a challenge in his eyes. Then he led her down the aisle, into the light. The journey home. The carriage ride back to Hawthorne House was silent, but it was a loud kind of silence. They sat side by side, their thighs touching. The curtains were drawn against the cold afternoon. Nathaniel had pulled off his gloves. He was holding her hand in his lap, rubbing his thumb over the new gold band on her finger, over and over, as if checking it was real. "You were trembling," he said quietly, staring at her hand. "In the church." "I was afraid," she admitted, "that I wouldn't come. That I would wake up," she said, "that I would be back in that other chapel, alone." Nathaniel stopped rubbing her hand. He lifted it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You will never be in that chapel again," he promised against her skin. "And you will never be alone. I have spent 5 years being alone, Emilia. I have no intention of spending another minute of it without you." The carriage turned into the gates of Hawthorne House. It was a massive estate, far larger than Ashdown. It was imposing, built of grey stone, with towers that scraped the sky. It looked like the castle of a beast. But as they pulled up to the entrance, Amelia saw that every window was lit. The golden glow spilled out onto the snow, turning the grey stone warm and welcoming. He had ordered the fires lit. For her. The master suite. Late night. The wedding supper was over. The guests had gone. Amelia stood in the center of the master bedroom. It was a vast room, dominated by a four-poster bed hung with heavy velvet curtains. A fire roared in the marble hearth, banishing the winter chill. Sarah had helped her out of her gown and into her nightdress, a slip of white silk and lace. She had brushed Amelia's hair until it shone, then left, closing the door with a soft click. Amelia was alone. She walked to the fire, hugging her arms around herself. She was not afraid of Nathaniel, but she was nervous. The door opened. Nathaniel entered. He had discarded his formal coat. He wore a fresh white shirt, unbuttoned at the throat, and dark trousers. He looked tired, but his eyes were alert. He locked the door. The sound echoed in the quiet room. He turned and looked at her. He didn't move immediately. He stayed by the door, giving her space, giving her control. "You are beautiful," he said. His voice was rough. Amelia turned to face him. "I am nervous." "So am I," he confessed, walking slowly toward her. "You?" She laughed nervously. "The rake of hawthorn." Nathaniel stopped a few feet away. His expression was serious. "The rake was a performance, Amelia. A costume I wore to keep people away." He reached out and took her hand, pulling her gently toward him until she was standing between his spread legs. He didn't touch her anywhere else. He just held her hands. "I told you once," he said softly, "that I held to the old morals, that I believed intimacy belonged to vows." Amelia nodded. "I broke those morals," he said, his eyes searching hers. "After she left, I tried to drown the pain in other women. I thought if I acted like a sinner, I would stop feeling like a fool." He lifted her hands and placed them on his chest, over his heart. She could feel it beating, heavy and fast. "But none of them were you," he whispered, "and none of them mattered. I was sleepwalking, Amelia, until the moment I saw you in the snow." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "This, with you." He swallowed hard. "This is the first time I'm awake." Amelia's heart swelled. The last remnant of fear dissolved. She reached up and unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. Nathaniel's breath hitched. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice strained. "I am your wife," she whispered, "and I am tired of sleeping alone." He made a low sound in his throat, a growl of surrender. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her to the bed. He laid her down against the pillows, his body covering hers, his weight heavy and grounding. He kissed her. It was slow, reverent, worshipping. He took his time. He learned the curve of her neck, the softness of her skin, the sound of her breath. He treated her not like a conquest, but like a treasure he had fought a war to bring home. And when they finally came together, in the quiet warmth of the firelight, there were no ghosts in the room. There was no Clara. There was no Harringdale. There was only Nathaniel and Amelia, and the storm outside finally was silent.
Never wanted you tangled in the shadows of my name, but you saw the man beneath all that frost.
How could I believe you cared when the world swore you would break me? Because you were the first person I wanted to protect, even from myself.
Your shadow crossed my quiet dawn, a winter light I didn't choose. You held your posture like a storm, yet something in your voice was bruised.
I never meant to seem unfeeling, never meant to let you stand alone. The world has carved me out of rumors, but truth is quieter than stone.
Something in that silence pulled us near. Something in your breathing made things clear. Tears of ice melt in your hands. Every fear breaks where you stand. If love is fragile, let it rise twice. Once for the wounding, once for the prize. Harmonious ending.
Teaser.
I never sought a hero's mercy, just honesty beneath your gaze. But you were forged in colder hours, still learning how a warm heart stays.
You never knew the storms I carried, the ghosts I kept beneath my pride. But when you looked at me with kindness, something long buried came alive.
I should have spoken sooner.
Should have stayed, but fear can make a strong heart half afraid.
Tears of ice fall from the past. Let them break this time at last. If hearts must shatter, let it be wise. Two souls learning what never dies. Harmonized ending.
Tears of ice.
You held your secrets like a weapon, afraid their truth would drive me far.
But I have stood through colder seasons, and still I know just who you are.
You saw the man behind the rumors, not the wreck the world believed.
And when you placed your trust upon me, something fractured, something healed. If I could hold your name through winter, if I could warm the nights you fear,
I trade my doubts for one admission. I never meant to disappear.
but love is born in harsher places, where broken hearts learn how to rise, where whispers fade and truth remains and warmth survives. The tears
fragile hours, softened echo.
Tears